In 15 years in Hollywood, no one in Hollywood has a memory of going to a sold-out Kevin Hart show, there being a line for him ever getting a standing ovation at any comedy club. He already had his deals when he got here.
Two legends, one target, and a silence that's been broken for good. Katt Williams and Eddie Murphy. Two names that don't just represent comedy, they are comedy. Between them, they've got decades of sold-out arenas, cultural moments that defined generations, and a combined body of work that no one in this industry even comes close to touching. These are men who have nothing to prove, no reason to lie, no reason to play games. So when both of them, independently, start pointing their fingers in the same direction, you have to stop and ask yourself, what do they know that we don't? Because what's happening right now isn't just some celebrity beef. It's not a jealousy thing. It's not clout chasing. When Katt Williams sat down with Shannon Sharpe on Club Shay Shay and laid out a full, detailed case against Kevin Hart, and then Eddie Murphy turned around and quietly co-signed every ounce of that skepticism, something shifted, the ground moved, and Kevin Hart's carefully constructed empire suddenly started showing its cracks. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to be asking questions you have never asked before. And some of the answers? They might genuinely change the way you see one of the biggest names in Hollywood. Let's get into it. Eddie Murphy speaks, and that matters more than you think. Let's start with Eddie Murphy, because his role in all of this is the part that most people are sleeping on. For years, Eddie Murphy was the definition of unbothered. He stepped away from the spotlight, focused on his family, made the occasional film, and completely stayed out of the messy politics of Hollywood celebrity culture. He didn't do feuds. He didn't throw shade on Instagram. He didn't drop cryptic interviews with pointed jabs. He was just gone, peacefully, powerfully. That silence by itself was a statement. When you are Eddie Murphy, you don't need to prove anything to anybody. Raw is still the #1 stand-up concert film at the box office of all time. He hadn't even been on stage in 27 years and he was still sitting on top of the mountain. That's how dominant this man's legacy is. So when someone finally asked Eddie about Kevin Hart supposedly breaking his box office record for stand-up, everyone expected either a gracious acknowledgement or a diplomatic non-answer. That's what you get from someone who's been out of the game for that long, right? Wrong. Eddie Murphy looked into that camera, almost amused, and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "What record? I don't know what record you're talking about. Where did he break it?" And then, with that legendary Eddie Murphy energy, he casually mentioned that he needed to get back on stage because he wants his record back. Now look, on the surface, that sounds like a joke. Haha, funny moment, classic Eddie. But here's what you need to understand about Eddie Murphy. This is a man who measures every single word. He has been in this business long enough to know exactly what he's doing when he says something on camera. Nothing is accidental. Nothing is throwaway. What Eddie was really saying was this: Kevin Hart's claim doesn't hold up, and I haven't even been trying, and I'm still ahead of him. It was dismissal dressed up in humor. And in Hollywood, a calm, laughing dismissal from a legend is 10 times more devastating than an angry one. Think about it from Kevin's perspective. You spend years building up this narrative that you broke Eddie Murphy's record. You use it as a cornerstone of your brand. The idea that you're not just successful, you're historically successful. And then Eddie Murphy, the man himself, goes on camera and basically says, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not just a shot, that's an erasure. And here's the thing that makes it even more significant. Eddie didn't need to say anything. Nobody was forcing him to respond. He could have just let Kevin have his moment. The fact that he chose to address it, even in that casual way, tells you everything. It was a message, delivered with a smile, but a message. Now, once Eddie Murphy plants that seed of doubt, suddenly everybody else who had been thinking the same thing feels like they have permission to say it out loud. And nobody had been waiting longer to say it out loud than Katt Williams. Katt Williams, the case that started years ago. Because here's what people forget. Katt Williams wasn't just randomly coming for Kevin Hart in 2024. This tension goes back a decade. Back in 2014, Katt was already sliding in references during his sets. Subtle at first, but pointed enough that people in the know understood exactly what he was saying. By 2016, the subtlety was completely gone. Katt Williams stood on stage and straight up called Kevin Hart a puppet. Not a rising competitor, not a younger comedian who needed to learn. A puppet. controlled, manufactured, not the author of his own story. Now, Katt also challenged Kevin to a $5 million head-to-head comedy battle around this time. Put the money on the table. Said, let's settle this the way comedians are supposed to settle it. On stage, in front of an audience, with nothing but your jokes and your timing. Kevin never responded. Let that marinate for a second, because there are really only two explanations for why you don't respond to that kind of challenge. Either you're so far above it that it doesn't deserve your attention, or you're not confident you'd win. And given that Kevin's entire brand is built around being the hardest working, most confident, most relentless comic alive, option one feels like a stretch. A real competitor doesn't walk away from a challenge. They make the challenge irrelevant by crushing it. The silence was loud. And here's something else a lot of people forget. In 2016, Katt actually apologized for calling Kevin out by name during one of his sets. He went on radio and said he regretted it. That's not the behavior of someone who's just reckless and bitter. That's someone who genuinely wrestled with the decision to go public. Someone who pulled back, reflected, and still, despite the apology, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The frustration kept building. It couldn't stay buried forever. The Club Shay Shay moment. The case gets specific. Then January 2024 happened. Katt Williams sat down with Shannon Sharpe on Club Shay Shay and did something that shook the entire entertainment industry. He didn't just throw insults. He didn't just vent. He built a case. Methodical, detailed, specific. The kind of case that doesn't fall apart when you push back on it. Here's what Katt laid out, and I want you to really listen to this because every single point deserves attention. He questioned Kevin's origin story. Kevin Hart has told the story of grinding on the East Coast comedy circuit over and over again. Philadelphia stages, small clubs, building an audience one room at a time. It's a beautiful narrative. The underdog from Philly who worked his way up. But Katt pointed out a timeline problem. Kevin claims he was grinding on the East Coast circuit, but somehow during that same window, he was also working in Los Angeles. And not just dipping a toe in, he had his own sitcom on network television and a movie called Soul Plane, in what would have been essentially his first year in LA. Let me ask you this directly. Have you ever heard of a comedian, any comedian, who went to LA for the first time and within a year had a network sitcom and a major film role? Does that sound like a grind story to you? Does that sound like someone who paid their dues the normal way? Or does that sound like someone who arrived with a door already opened for them? Katt's point wasn't that Kevin isn't talented. His point was that the path Kevin took doesn't match the story Kevin tells about that path. And those are two very different things. But the most explosive claim Katt made, the one that people are still talking about months later, was this. For 5 straight years, every major comedy film that ended up on Kevin Hart's resume had first been offered to Katt Williams. 5 years, every film. And Katt turned them down, not because he didn't want the work, not because he didn't need the money, but because he had conditions. He asked for script changes. He didn't want to play into certain stereotypes. He wasn't willing to do certain scenes that he felt compromised who he was as an artist and as a black man in Hollywood. And when he asked for those changes, when he pushed back on the parts of those scripts that didn't sit right with him, the studios said no. And then those exact same scripts, unchanged, went straight to Kevin Hart, who took them, exactly as they were. Now, I want to be fair here. Kevin Hart has addressed this kind of criticism before. He told Oprah back in 2014 that Hollywood makes everything look like overnight success, but he'd been putting in work for 18 years. And I actually believe him when he says he works hard. Nobody gets to Kevin's level by accident. The man has grind in him. I'm not disputing that. But that's not what Katt is disputing either. Katt's question, the one that has never been answered, is not, did Kevin work hard? The question is, who opened the doors? And what did Kevin have to agree to in order to walk through them? Those are two completely different conversations. And every time someone tries to start the second one, Kevin steers back to the first. Why? The Diddy connection, the clip that changed everything. Now we need to talk about something that has given this whole story a completely different weight. Because everything we've covered so far, the timeline questions, the industry plant allegations, the box office record dispute, all of that was already circulating in certain corners of the internet. But then something happened that brought it out of the shadows and into everyone's feed. The Diddy footage resurfaced. In 2010, Kevin Hart hosted a party in Las Vegas for Diddy. At the time, Nobody thought twice about it. Celebrity party. Kevin was rising. Diddy was Diddy. It made sense, but when that footage came back around recently, people watched it with completely different eyes. There's a clip. Kevin is in a small dark bathroom. There are women in bikinis, candles everywhere. The energy in that room is wild. Not fun wild, but something is off wild. And at one point, one of the women's hair catches fire. It literally catches fire. And the reaction in that room, Kevin's reaction, everyone's reaction, is laughter. Not panic, not concern, laughter. Nobody helps her. Kevin laughs. Now I want you to sit with that image for a moment, because what kind of environment normalizes someone being on fire as funny? What kind of culture exists in a room where a woman's hair catches fire and the host of the party doesn't flinch? But that's not even the clip that has people asking the hardest questions. There's another moment in that footage where Kevin is talking to whoever's holding the camera, and he essentially tells them to keep the camera away from a specific area of the room, wherever Diddy is. He doesn't explain why. Just, don't film over there. And the camera catches a brief glimpse of that area before it moves away. Just a glimpse, enough to make people wonder. Now let me be absolutely clear. Kevin Hart has not been accused of committing any crime at that party. I am not saying he did anything illegal. What I am saying is that we now know, based on federal charges and ongoing investigations, that Diddy was allegedly running private events where some very serious, very dark things were happening. Things that involved coercion, abuse, and exploitation that the government has documented in extensive detail. Kevin wasn't just a guest at one of these events, he was the host. He was the one who set the tone for the room. He was the one who apparently knew where the camera could and couldn't go. And when paparazzi have caught up with him and asked him directly about his connection to Diddy, he dodges. Every single time. No explanation. No, I didn't know what was going on. No, here's what I actually saw that night. Just nothing. Let me ask you something, and I want you to genuinely think about this. If you hosted a party, and you found out later that the person whose party you hosted was now facing federal charges for things that allegedly happened at events just like that one, wouldn't you want to say something? Wouldn't you want to get ahead of it? Clear the air? Give the public some context? Kevin Hart has said nothing. And in the world of public relations and image management, which is a world Kevin Hart knows better than almost anyone, silence is never accidental. The pattern, accountability on Kevin's terms. Now here's what I need you to notice, because once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. Kevin Hart has a very specific way of handling controversy. He doesn't get ahead of things when he should. He doesn't address problems when they're manageable. He waits. He goes quiet. He hopes things die down. And then, only when the pressure becomes genuinely too much to survive, he shows up with an apology or an explanation. And even then, it's carefully crafted, controlled, on his terms. Let's walk through the evidence. Kevin gets arrested for a DUI in Los Angeles. He was speeding and nearly hit a tanker truck. He admitted he'd been drinking. He handled it, moved forward. People make mistakes. Fine, but file it away. It's the beginning of a pattern. Someone tries to extort Kevin with footage from a Las Vegas night where he was with a woman who was not his wife, while his wife Eniku was pregnant. Kevin's response was to get on social media himself and publicly apologize before the footage could be weaponized. And honestly, tactically, that was smart. Getting in front of it before someone else controlled the narrative is PR 101. But here's what struck me. Eniku confirmed in their Netflix documentary that she found out about this the same way the public did. She was carrying his child, and she found out her husband had been unfaithful through a social media post. Think about what that means for a second. The apology that Kevin released publicly, that was her notification. The world found out at the same time she did. That's not accountability. That's damage control that happened to include a sorry. Then 2018, Kevin gets announced as the Oscar host, arguably the most prestigious hosting gig in entertainment, and almost immediately, old tweets and stand-up clips resurface where he was making jokes at the expense of the LGBTQ community. Kevin's first response? I've already addressed this. I'm not apologizing again. He had to be pushed, hard, before he finally stepped down from hosting and then issued a real apology after the fact. Do you see the pattern? Every single time, it's the same sequence. Problem surfaces. Kevin goes quiet or deflects. Pressure builds. Kevin eventually addresses it, but only once ignoring it is no longer an option. Now layer that pattern on top of everything we've talked about today. The Diddy footage, the Monique situation, the industry plant allegations, the box office record that Eddie Murphy doesn't seem to remember. Every single one of these things follows the exact same playbook, and Kevin is still silent on all of it. The Monica betrayal, the one that hit different. I saved this one for here because honestly, out of everything, this is the story that affected me the most. Because this one isn't about fame or records or industry politics. This one is about a person. In 2021, Monique, Oscar winner, comedy legend, a woman who had been fighting Hollywood's blacklist for years, went on Kevin Hart's podcast, Comedy Gold Mines, and she was vulnerable. She opened up about everything she'd been going through, how her career had been essentially frozen because of her falling out with Oprah and Tyler Perry, how she and her family were struggling, how she just needed someone in her corner. And Kevin stepped up, or at least, that's what it looked like. He told Monique she was family to him, like a mother, an aunt, a sister. He said he wanted to help, and then, and this is the part that matters, he didn't just say it, he acted on it. He called Tyler Perry personally on her behalf and came back saying Tyler was ready to move forward. He told Monique, let's leave the negativity behind. We've got bigger things to do together. He offered to partner with her, executive produce. Whatever she wanted to do, he was in. Monique believed him. Why wouldn't she? This wasn't some vague promise over drinks at a party. He made a phone call. He gave her specifics. She had every reason to take him at his word, and she did. She went and told her producers at Endemol about the partnership. Everyone got excited. Having Kevin Hart attached to a project is a genuine industry signal. It opens doors. They were gearing up to get her talk show back on the air. Oh, and one more thing. Kevin also lent Monique a significant amount of money during this period, and Monique paid it back, with interest. She made sure everyone knew that. So this wasn't a situation where she was trying to take advantage of him. She upheld every part of her end. 2 weeks later, Endemol called Monique. Kevin's manager, Dave Becky, had reached out to tell them Kevin was backing out. Monique called Kevin directly. She needed an explanation. She needed something. What she got was, "We'll talk Tuesday. Don't worry about it." That was over 2 years ago. She hasn't heard from him since. Now, why would Kevin do that? Why make those promises? Make that phone call to Tyler Perry, get everyone's hopes up, and then vanish? Some people believe the answer is Oprah and Tyler Perry, because if Kevin's career depends on staying in the good graces of the most powerful producers in the industry, and Oprah and Tyler Perry are very much on that list, then helping the woman they blacklisted is not just risky, it's potentially career suicide. And if that's true, then Kevin made promises he either knew he couldn't keep, or promises he was never planning to keep. Either way, it's a betrayal, and it happened to a woman who was already down. I'll let you decide what you think about that, but I'll say this. That's not the behavior of the hardest working man in Hollywood. That's the behavior of someone who says whatever the room needs to hear. The bigger picture, what Katt and Eddie are really saying. So let's zoom out. Because when you put all of this together, what Katt Williams and Eddie Murphy are really doing is asking a single fundamental question. Is Kevin Hart's story true? Not is Kevin Hart talented? He is. Not, does Kevin Hart work hard? He probably does. Not, does Kevin Hart deserve some of what he's achieved? Maybe. But the story Kevin tells about how he got here, that's what's being interrogated. The story goes like this. Kid from Philly, rough upbringing, found comedy, grinding on stages nobody cared about, getting booed, getting humbled, putting in the work, year after year after year until the world had no choice but to pay attention. A pure, earned grassroots rise to the top. It's a great story. It's the kind of story that makes people love you. It's the kind of story that makes your success feel like proof that the system works, that hard work pays off, that anyone can make it. But Katt Williams is saying that story has holes in it. The timeline doesn't add up. The opportunities didn't come from grinding. They came from somewhere else, from someone else. And the price of those opportunities was a willingness to play by rules that other comedians, black comedians specifically, refused to accept. And Eddie Murphy? Eddie Murphy is the living proof of what it looks like when you do it the real way. He paid his dues. He built his audience. He got to the top on his own terms, and then he walked away on his own terms. And when someone claims they've passed him, he turns around and says, calmly with a smile, "I'm not sure that's true." That combination, Katt with the detailed accusations, Eddie with the quiet, knowing skepticism, is more powerful than either one alone. Because now it's not just one frustrated comedian. Now it's a pattern of recognition from people who know this industry from the inside out. And the question for you watching this is, does Kevin Hart owe us answers? Think about it seriously. This is a man who has built his entire brand on authenticity, on being the everyday guy who made it, on being honest about his failures, his DUI, his infidelity, his setbacks. He sells transparency. He's made hundreds of millions of dollars off the image of a man who keeps it real. So if that image is constructed, if the transparency is selective, if the vulnerability is strategic, if the story has been edited, then what exactly are we buying? The road forward. What Kevin needs to do. Here's the thing about Kevin Hart, and I want to be fair to him here, because fairness matters. He is genuinely funny. He has put in real work. He has an undeniable work ethic and a business mind that most people in entertainment can't match. Built a production company, built a media brand, built partnerships with corporations that no black comedian had ever touched. That part of his story is real, but real success doesn't require a manufactured origin story. Real work doesn't need to be protected by deflection and silence. Kevin Hart could end most of this conversation tomorrow, not by attacking Katt Williams, not by having his PR team release a statement, but by actually addressing the specific claims that have been made. Address the Diddy footage. Tell people what you saw that night. Tell people why the camera couldn't go in certain directions. Give people context. Explain what happened with Monique. Did you make promises you couldn't keep? If so, why? What happened between the podcast conversation and Dave Becky calling Endemol 2 weeks later? Respond to Katt's timeline questions with specifics. If the origin story is accurate, prove it. Receipts, dates, venues. The comedy world has a long memory, and if Eddie Murphy wants his record back, let him come get it. Accept the challenge. Get on stage and remind everybody why you deserve to be where you are. People respect honesty infinitely more than they respect a perfectly managed brand. The era of curated celebrity is collapsing in real time. Audiences have gotten too smart, too connected, and too tired of being sold a version of someone instead of the actual person. Kevin Hart's silence isn't protecting him anymore. It's costing him. Every week that passes without real answers is another week the questions get louder. And Katt and Eddie are not the only ones asking. So here's where I leave you, and I genuinely want to know what you think. We have Katt Williams, a man with every reason to lie but a track record of saying things that turned out to be true, laying out a detailed, specific case that Kevin Hart's rise was engineered, not earned. We have Eddie Murphy, a man with nothing to gain and nothing to prove, casually but clearly questioning the legitimacy of Kevin's most famous claim. We have footage from a Diddy party that Kevin hosted, where very strange things were happening, and Kevin hasn't said a word about it. We have Monique, who was promised support, believed in those promises enough to act on them, and was then abandoned without explanation. And we have a decade-long pattern of Kevin Hart only addressing controversy when he has no other choice. So I'm asking you directly, do you believe Katt Williams? Not the old Katt. Not the Katt people dismissed, but the Katt who sat down on Club Shay Shay with specific dates, specific titles, specific claims that haven't been rebutted with specifics. Was Eddie Murphy just joking, or was he doing what legends do, saying exactly what they mean, just wrapped in a smile? And does Kevin Hart owe people real answers? Not motivational talk, not "I'm just focused on being positive." Real answers to real questions. Drop it in the comments. I read everything, and I want to know where you stand, because this conversation is bigger than Kevin Hart. It's about who Hollywood chooses to elevate, what the price of that elevation is, and whether the stories we're sold about success in this industry are ever really the whole story. If this video made you think, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear this conversation. Subscribe if you're new, because we go deep on stories like this every week. Share this with someone who thinks they know the Kevin Hart story, because after watching this, they might want to reconsider. I'll see y'all in the next one.